So with that as background, I want to turn it over to DOT to go through its PowerPoint, and then that'll be followed again by Planning Board and then myself again. So.
Thanks, Glenn. So we'll run through a quick summary of the additional analysis that was performed and answer any questions you may have. Next slide, Glenn. So just a refresher on the project goals. We were seeking to identify improvements on US 29 that would complement the initial investment that the county made in US 29 Flash. It started in fall 2020. Improve corridor travel time and reliability for all modes, and increase pedestrian and bicycle access and safety around the stations. Next slide. The three alternatives that are up for consideration are the no build, which would be doing nothing other than what's been currently placed out on the corridor today. We have the managed lane alternative that was presented back in 2020 that would create a bus and HOV lane between Musgrove Road and Spring Street and bus on shoulder north of Musgrove Road, and then a dedicated medium bus lane alternative from Tech Road to Sligo Creek Parkway. So just a refresher of the managed lane alternative. So in the morning period, running southbound, there would be the creation of a fourth lane that would be for buses and HOV vehicles between Musgrove Road and Stewart Lane. Starting at New Hampshire Avenue, Maryland 650, and continuing down to the Burnt Mills area, we would be repurposing one of the three southbound lanes to create a bus and HOV lane. And then down south of Sligo Creek Parkway, approaching Spring Street, we would repurpose one of the currently four directional lanes that run inbound in the morning to create a bus and HOV lane. I'll direct you to the graphic on the right-hand side of the screen. The green crosses are where we're proposing intersection improvements. So at Greencastle, Tech Road, Stewart, Maryland 650, the Beltway, and Sligo Creek Parkway. And the red dots are where stations would be located. Next slide. Yes.
Tom. So how many lanes are we today? Is it 3 and 3?
3. Yes. In the evening rush, the configuration would flip, so there'd be an additional bus and HOV lane running northbound, and the configuration would look the opposite of the southbound configuration in the morning. The medium bus lane alternative would seek to create between Tech Road and Sligo Creek Parkway a combination of dual and single lane medium busway. There would be 2 intersection improvements that were identified through the additional analysis, the one at Greencastle up at the northern end, and the Beltway ramp at I-495 and southbound US 29. We would also relocate 2 of the stations, the station at Burnt Mills and the station at Four Corners, into the median to facilitate that design. And we studied the addition of a station at Franklin Avenue, which is shown on the diagram as well. So touching just briefly on the station relocations that would need to be facilitated by the median busway. So at Burnt Mills, we would relocate one of the stations into the median. We would shift the northbound station up to the next block, taking advantage of what we anticipate to be a property impact. And this would put the 2 stations at a signalized intersection at Hillwood Drive. Next slide. No, both of the, if you flip back, Glenn. So both stations, not into the median. So the current flash stations sit at the signal to the left side of the screen at the Burnt Mills Shopping Center intersection, both on the curb side. In this configuration with only a single lane, we would move the southbound station into the median. That's the purple rectangular space that you see. And then the northbound station would shift closer to that intersection at Hillwood Avenue so that the two stations are proximate to each other but not in the median together. And this was to reduce property impacts.
Right, but the new station in the media was correct.
Incorrect. Just southbound, and the northbound one would be served on the curb, facilitated by a Q-jump configuration in and out of the lane.
And that's the Midland property.
Correct. Yes. At Four Corners, this is a segment where we have dual lane guideway, so we'd be putting both the southbound and the northbound stations into the median at the University Boulevard intersection, and you can see that on the graphic shown here. There is a slight shift needed onto the school property there, but it would just be impacting the public right-of-way. It would not be getting into facilities associated with the school. And this is the proposed station that we looked at Franklin Avenue. We heard during the initial outreach phases of this project a desire to get a station between downtown Silver Spring and the Beltway. We found a location at Franklin Avenue where we can fit in a station. The southbound station would be in the median. The northbound station would be out on the curb lane. When we ran ridership modeling for this station configuration, we're estimating only about 200 daily riders in the future, and we estimate the cost of this station, separate of the median guideway improvements, to be about $4 million.
If I could just pick up on that point, the ridership estimate 200 or so, is that where would you estimate they're going? Is that mostly just going down to the metro?
Some of them would be going down to the metro. There were some riders that would also get on in the opposite direction, headed north. But I don't have a exact breakdown of that percentage of the 200, but it would be a combination of both directions.
Because I think in terms of public conversation, this is a new addition, right?
Yes.
It is, right. So that's why I'm picking up on it. So I've heard the concerns of people in that community of which I live, asking why there's no BRT stop there. But the logic has been it's bus rapid transit for those who need to travel rapidly up and down the 29 corridor. And that area, particularly on Franklin, Colesville, there are a number of ride-on and metro buses that service that area, which is what I have shared with them is the reason that there is nothing really inside the Beltway aside from the terminus. So is this now a consideration? Is this something you are looking to do or getting our support for?
So this was a consideration. We heard that same feedback, that there would be a desire to get a flash station inside the Beltway. We took this opportunity of the additional study to look at what that would mean from both an engineering perspective, what it would cost to do something like that, and then also to figure out how much ridership we think that station would generate, so that then there's a decision to make. Do we want to make that investment for the potential return? And so that is a question that was before the planning board as well as before you.
And the only last question I have, the 200 or so passengers, daily passengers for that proposed station, how does that compare to some of the other stops?
It is one of the lower, when we look at the forecast, it is one of the lower stations, but it's not the lowest. I think the lowest one was Castle Boulevard.
Interesting. Okay, thanks.
And that's assuming a walk shed of how large?
Roughly a half a mile. I mean, the model doesn't really consider walk sheds. It's just looking at, does this option of taking the flash serve those riders and assign them to the flash trip?
Right. And are you assuming that all the people that would normally take Metrobus and ride on would now take flash, or some percentage?
This would likely take some of those riders, and they would shift over to the flash if it were a better option for them.
Hans?
Yeah, what would be the time savings for a southbound? I mean, northbound, I could see a good argument here if you're trying to get up to White Oak or Howard County. You should be able to get on inside the Beltway that's not all the way in the transit center. But southbound in the morning, is there much of a time savings really for someone who's boarding there versus boarding the next ride-on or the next other bus? I mean, I guess we don't know yet what the design is of the system south of Sligo Creek?
There we go. Remember this, in both cases, the median and the managed bus lane, BRT, we're talking about southbound only in the morning and northbound only in the evening. So we're talking, so really the predominant movement is to head into Silver Spring in the morning and to head out from Silver Spring in the evening. So the question really is, how much better service would somebody in the Franklin Avenue neighborhood get from a BRT service when it's less than a mile from downtown Silver Spring?
Right.
That's why I think the planning board recommended not doing this.
Okay, you recommended not doing this for that reason, because there's just such a minor enhancement to service.
It's not worth the cost, and it's another stop for everybody else coming down.
Right.
It slows their trip.
Is it dual if we were to choose the dual median, is it all the, it stops at Sligo Creek either way, doesn't it? Or does it go all the way?
I'm sorry, what?
The dual median. Where does the design?
The dual median is only in, dual lane median is only within Four Corners itself. It's from Southwood Avenue down to the Beltway. In this section, it's a single lane. It's one lane southbound or northbound, depending on the morning versus afternoon.
Okay. Okay. So, do you know how much time it saves for a southbound rider to take this versus a available ride-on or other local bus?
We don't have that segmented level of detail in terms of travel times, but I wouldn't anticipate it to be too great.
Like 30 seconds or a minute?
It probably, but yeah, I don't have the data to inform that question specifically. So moving on.
I'm sorry, one last.
Yes.
Sorry, since we're torturing you with answer questions. So it wasn't mentioned, but between then Sligo Creek Parkway and downtown Silver Spring, the single lane option in the median presupposes the elimination, right, of the reversible lane currently, which I'm not a fan of. And state highways, you wouldn't be doing that on either side of the lane, right? So it presupposes getting rid of that, and state highways okay with that.
So we did look at a configuration where we, even in the median lane configuration south of Sligo, we would take one of those lanes and convert it to a bus-only lane. Our initial results showed promise. It definitely showed travel time benefits for bus, and at least in the southbound direction, it didn't seem to show severe negative impacts to general traffic. We weren't convinced about the results through this study, so actually our traffic division is advancing a pilot bus lane study from Sligo Creek Parkway down to Spring Street, and that's currently underway to look at a number of different configurations. So we're still awaiting the outcomes of that analysis to determine whether we could implement a bus lane sooner than a configuration that would likely be achieved under this proposal.
Okay. I guess I should say I'd like reversible lanes as long as they're restricted and not a recipe for a head-on collision like that one is. Okay, thanks. Sorry.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So we also, as part of the median bus lane, would have to change access restrictions along the corridor. And so looking at certain intersections along the corridor, primarily in the Four Corners, Burnt Mills, and then south of the Beltway, we identified those intersections where the turning movements in the peak directions were the lowest, and proposed that we would restrict left turning access at those intersections. And so those vehicles would then shift to the next available signalized intersection to access their neighborhoods. And that's what this graphic shows, is that the access restrictions are where the no left turns are indicated, and the arrows indicate where those movements would shift to reach the intersection, or to reach the neighborhood. And this is in response to keeping the busway safe and not having vehicles turn across the busway in an unsignalized condition.
Can you keep that? So the only places you could turn left would be Prelude into Dumont Oaks for that whole subdivision, right?
Correct.
And Burnt Mills for both Burnt Mills Hills and Burnt Mills. And then farther south of there, How do you? Yeah, how do you access Woodmore and North Four Corners?
So there would be intersections at Southwood, or signalized intersections at Southwood, and I believe it's Timberwood, to get into the neighborhoods on either side at the Four Corners area. There's already a signal. There already is a signal at Lanark as well. So we're not proposing removing any existing signals. These would be new traffic signals that would also be installed.
Right. The Lanark one's been an improvement for sure. And then okay, so what is the greatest distance a driver would have to travel without having access to a left turn?
I don't have that information.
Okay. Just for the sake of argument, so when northbound drivers come up 16th Street now and go through 16th Street Circle, which isn't a circle, onto Colesville, there's been those decisions in recent years to remove each of the left turns until you get to like Spring Street or beyond it, right? Has that been seen as a success generally? Because I've certainly had a lot of complaints about it, and I don't live in I can't think of the name of the apartments and the condos there, but I still can't figure out how those folks end up getting home without going way out of their way. But do you?
I'm not familiar with the history of those restrictions. So probably they would have been done by SHA for a safety purpose, but I'm not sure how they've been received. I don't think we've received a lot of
You
feedback
haven't,
about
okay.
it. And these distances are relatively modest. I mean, they're
This is smaller, yeah.
a few
no,
thousand feet.
There you go past like 6 intersections that say no left
Yeah.
turn. Yes, in a row, probably. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Councilman Glass.
So looking, go back one more, I'm sorry. One more before that. Yep, to the map. Perfect, thank you. So the map on the right, I can see my house. And so this question is not coming from me, it's coming from my neighbors, right? So south of the Beltway, the only left turn is on Hastings, correct? You can then, according to this, no left turn onto Brewster or any of those other roads until Franklin. Would that be correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
No longer Leeton.
Hastings is the street that goes to the YMCA,
Yeah.
which is the building right there.
No more Leeton cut through.
Hey, right? Nobody, yeah. I'll end my comment there, but that is helpful. I mean, and as the chair noted, it has not necessarily been neighbors in my area who have expressed concern about this. That has most notably come from the North Four Corners community, the Woodmore community, for sure. And so I appreciate him asking those questions, but just trying to figure out how I'll get home, but I'll be okay.
Next slide, Glenn. So looking at the comparison of the alternatives, so this is AM southbound travel times, and we can see the no build condition against the managed lane and against the median bus lane. I will point out that the managed lane shows 3 bars. That's because we break out the single occupant vehicle travel time from the carpool vehicle travel time. And we see generally that BRT travel times improve under both the managed lane and the median bus lane to varying degrees. Single occupant vehicle travel times improve under the managed lane and stay unchanged in the median bus lane.
This carpooling component here, what's the share of trips that you are estimating are carpool trips?
So in the traffic simulation, we estimated that an additional 10% would carpool on top of people that already carpool, even though there is no incentive to carpool in the corridor. And so that worked out to about 20 to 25% of vehicles would be carpool vehicles in the corridor. This, we felt, was a fairly conservative estimate given what we've observed in the corridor.
Really?
And the potential for carpooling in the corridor.
You expand on that. I mean, it sounds really high to me. Are there analogous settings where you've seen something like this work? But first, go to your observed. You're saying you've had an engineer out there and you've been scanning.
So we did a windshield survey of vehicle occupants, and what we saw is that about 15% of trips, and this was not necessarily during the peak period. This was other periods of the day, were carpooling.
Or multiple people in the car.
Yes, which is what we're trying to incentivize, and that's without any incentive, right? There's no HOV benefit to carpooling. We're not marketing to carpoolers. We're not doing anything else to try and get people to carpool, and they're already doing that. And so we felt like a shift of an additional 10% would not be a huge change, given that there would now be an incentive to do this. There would be a carpool lane that would provide travel time benefits to carpools, as well as other things that our commuter services division could do to try and incentivize carpooling.
I mean, I guess I would ask for comments on this. I mean, it seems like a significant assumption, and under that assumption, it would seem like the total number of riders in multiple passenger vehicles is highest. But I don't know. It just it concerns me.
In the
that
travel
assumption.
forecast from the last round of study of this, I believe the carpooling exceeded that number, but it was capped at the 25% because we were concerned it was overstating the propensity to carpool given the travel time savings. But the travel time savings for carpooling over driving alone is very significant, as shown, seeing the difference in the height of those bars between
In this proposed
20 and 35 minutes. It's a 15-minute savings for somebody traveling that corridor in carpool versus driving alone, and that is enough time to incentivize people to go through the extra steps of finding that carpool, much like we used to see on 395 to the Pentagon, where people would find ways to carpool because the travel time savings were so great.
Jason, any comment?
For the record, Jason Sartori with the Planning Department. It's one of the we didn't really talk too much with the board about this assumption of the HOV, but one of the concerns is that we don't really know what post-pandemic rates are going to be like for HOV or for transit. We're still trying to kind of gauge that, I think. The other point that I would make is that one of the biggest time differences that is not captured in here is the non-recurring events that can cause backups. And when you are talking about the managed lanes options, when you've got crashes or cars pulled over or whatever it might be that you can't model, you don't know when these are going to occur, those types of delays are not factored in here. And under the managed lanes option, that would impact those in HOV, the buses, and single occupancy vehicles as well. Whereas with the median lanes option, that's because the median lanes are separated from the general purpose lanes, you wouldn't have the impact of the non-recurring delays.
I mean, how do you have buses moving faster in managed lanes than in median lanes?
So it's a small difference, a couple of minutes. Some of that is attributed to the additional signals that are added to the corridor to facilitate the median bus lane. So we add signals, it's going to slow down the corridor, even with transit signal priority.
And you're adding signals because of the left turn
The
issue?
left turn conflict over the median busway. You don't expect to, when you're making a left-hand turn, to have a vehicle approaching on your left-hand side. So we need to signalize those intersections so that it's safe for the flash bus to proceed through the intersection and not have a conflict with the turning vehicle.
So adding 3 signals could equal close to 5 minutes of additional travel time for the corridor?
For the the
For every
roughly
unit.
10 miles that the flash bus travels, yes. Because this is travel time from Georgia Avenue all the way up to Maryland
Wouldn't
198.
there be signal priority?
So our signal priority is not preemption. It doesn't grant the green when the flash approaches. When the flash approaches, if the signal can afford to stay longer for a couple of seconds, or if it can advance the green, it will do so. But it's a conditioned signalization. It's not the flash always gets a green or gets a faster green than it otherwise would.
Chris?
I can't join in, but the other issue is that each signal along the corridor is a little less efficient because of the different lane configuration. So when you have a managed lane, it's not a significant change to the way the corridor operates today, but with the median bus lane and the bus traveling, as Corey mentioned, to the left of other traffic, each signal is slightly less efficient than it is in the managed lane configuration. So it's the accumulation of those factors.
Thanks.
So I'm going to pick up where Councilmember Rimmer left off. This is not what I expected, and it's not the modeling that a lot of people expected. I'm trying to understand how a managed lane system has better travel times than a median dedicated lane. Clearly, you're factoring in carpooling and HOV. As I've noted in this committee during previous sessions, there's a lot of natural carpooling that occurs, shuttling kids around. And then also in terms of electric vehicles, which are also part of this, is that correct? Is that still part of this?
This
No
is
longer?
truly carpool, so
Okay,
you
okay.
have to have at least.
Yeah, I remember in a previous iteration, electric vehicles were factored in, but this is probably one of the highest concentrations of electric vehicle ownership in the county. And so I'm glad that's not in there as well. But I mean, are there other systems that operate this way?
So as we did a scan, there are systems in Canada. We actually found a system in San Francisco where they repurposed a curb lane during the pandemic and converted it to an HOV and a bus lane. That was done as a pilot, and from what I've read, they've actually continued to advance that pilot as something permanent, given the benefits that they saw.
What is the assumption that drivers, single occupancy vehicles will hop in these lanes as well, and how does that change or clog that traffic?
So obviously the model assumes that people obey the laws, and so if we've put a restriction in place that says if you're a single occupant vehicle, you shouldn't be using the managed lane, the model will show as such. So there will need to be a certain level of enforcement. Whether that's manual enforcement, people out there on the street ticketing people, or camera enforcement, which we're seeing more and more of, there will need to be enforcement in order to realize the travel times that are reported for the managed lane.
Sorry, do we have state authority to enforce? Oh, right, we'd have to get it. We don't have that. Cameras for managed.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
For HOV lanes.
So let me just ask one more question. Instead of focusing on the managed lane and the lower travel time, explain once again, if you have already done so, why the median lane is longer.
You mean why the travel time isn't as good?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Again, many of us are trying to wrap our mind around this. And so however it needs to be explained, and go ahead.
So we had to add additional traffic signals to make the median lane safe for vehicles turning across the corridor to access the neighborhoods. Additionally, the signalization just becomes more complex because we've added yet another piece to the puzzle of access at an intersection. And so the combination of the additional signals and the complexity at the intersections over the course of the corridor add additional travel time compared to the managed lane. The managed lane, when the bus arrives at the intersection, if the signal is green, it goes through. That's not necessarily the case in a median bus lane configuration. The general traffic lanes may be green, and if it's allowing left turn traffic across it, the flash would have to stop at that intersection to allow the left turns to clear before being able to proceed through.
And we're all caught up on this, and so I know we need to move on, but this is a really important piece of data. So this modeling, how far into the future does this modeling project?
So this is under 2025 conditions. This isn't well off into the future. We only modeled a 2025 condition in terms of traffic volumes.
Okay. So the reason I support BRT in the first place is because of the utility it will provide for decades to come. And I understand if in our modeling systems we can only do, or chose only to do, let me ask that question, is it we've only chosen to look at 2025, or can you model further beyond?
We could model further into the future. We'd have to make assumptions about how the traffic would grow. What I will say is that the 2025 assumed pre-COVID traffic growth, and obviously the further out we go, those growth factors are less.
So
and
I'm
less.
glad I asked that question, because I think this is the rub. It is creating a system that lasts for decades to come to manage the growth that we know is going to happen, and that growth is going to happen across the county, and particularly we're making sure that East County receives the infrastructure that residents there have long demanded. Whether it is projects like Viva White Oak, whether it is the transformation of Burtonsville Crossing, and everything in between, we want to make sure that residents can live there, can go shopping there, can eat there, and can travel there using many different methods. And we know that will mean more growth. And if this is based on a very limited scope, without taking into account the growth we know that's going to come, natural or otherwise, then I have concerns about the utility of this data as we try to create a system and invest hundreds of millions of dollars for a countywide network that will last a generation, two, or beyond. I see Director Conklin.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize a point that you're making. This is decision support data. It doesn't give you all of the information you need to pick an outcome. This is a particular scenario with a particular set of results that is imprecise compared to what will actually happen. The differences in those travel times are not enormous. They're in the same ballpark. I don't know that the transit travel time is a reason to pick one of these over the other. The question that you raised, which I think is an appropriate question, is which of these alternatives responds better in the longer term to protecting the transit performance over other alternatives. And as Mr. Sartori mentioned a few minutes ago, you have a greater degree of protection for the transit performance. And frankly, there's a great deal of scope for increasing the amount of transit using that compared to what's been modeled here. So this is one snapshot, but it is by no means a conclusive finding of which alternative is going to perform better.
Appreciate the greater context. My concern is that someone just simply looking at this will share it around and say that we are not investing wisely because according to this one chart, managed lanes clearly is the best cost benefit, right, according to this analysis. And I just want to caution against that, and that's what this conversation has provided. So thank you.
If I could also just elaborate a little bit more on this, that what you're also looking at here is if we are serious as a county about making improvements on our climate issues, our climate goals, our transportation goals, the things that the policy guidance that we've put in Thrive, then the median bus lane option really gives it seems to stand out as the preferred alternative here, because What we want to do is create a situation where people are, encouraged to get out of their vehicles and choose, when they can choose to take BRT. And if you have an option that, if you take these numbers and improves every situation and makes it more attractive to continue to be in a single occupancy vehicle or even to be in a HOV, you're not actually doing what we're calling for in Thrive, which is to make transit more preferential in ways that that you do get out of the medium bus lane option.
Thank you.
We seem to be trending into making our recommendations. Let me turn it back over to DOT to finish, because I think we all have a lot to say about analysis and recommendations.
Can I just ask? Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Jason, because I was going to point that out. You want the great, if you want to, for the cohort of our residents who are bus riders now, they get a better product either way. But for the people who are lucky enough to have a car and make a choice, you want the greatest delta and the greatest incentive to ride the bus if they live far away. Franklin Avenue, not much payoff, but if they live in Burtonsville or hopefully in the future Howard County, we want the greatest payoff. Did you happen to, was there any, when you were calculating the travel time for the bus, managed versus median, was that assuming the same ridership? Or were you assuming less ridership for managed?
So we didn't, in these traffic simulations, and they're different than travel forecasts, and we do have some data on forecasting as well, we didn't touch the ridership. So the ridership stayed static in both the managed lane and the medium bus lane.
Right, okay. It's the tiny time savings is not because there's fewer passengers getting on and off.
Correct.
Right? Okay. Glenn?
Nick? So I think we've talked about the southbound. Go back to the. This is the condition in the PM northbound. Again, we see Flash performing better in both scenarios, the managed lane and the medium bus lane. Again, the differences between the two are small, as Director Conklin mentioned, within the ballpark. We actually do see in the medium bus lane configuration a decrease in travel time for general traffic as well. Here are some other factors that we looked at. So the top bar in the chart shows the number of signalized intersections at level of service E or F. They decreased under the managed lane scenario in both the AM and the PM. There were small increases in the medium bus lane. Again, this comes from the additional signalization and complexity in the signalization that occurs. In terms of person throughput, how many people were actually moving through the corridor, we see a very small increase under the managed lane scenario. This is not surprising. We added some capacity to the roadway where we added that fourth managed lane up in the north. In terms of boardings, we do see the highest ridership increase under the medium bus lane. So by incentivizing and growing the rider and making the Flash better, we see more riders choosing the Flash. In terms of right-of-way impacts for the two alternatives, again, fairly close, 6.9 acres versus 5.5 under the managed and median scenarios. And the costs of the two projects, $105 million under the managed lane scenario and $128 million under the medium bus lane. I did want to touch briefly on kind of the mode share and what's happening under the two scenarios. So the first set of columns is the no build condition, and we can see the breakdown of single occupant to carpool to transit user. Not surprisingly, under the managed lane scenario, we see the number of single occupant vehicles drop because we're incentivizing some of those to choose to carpool, and we see the HOV2+ increase. Under the medium busway, what we see is that the transit percentage increases, the single occupant vehicle percentage stays roughly the same, and the carpool percentage drops just slightly. There were questions about the intersection improvements and where we saw value in those. As we worked through the various scenarios of the medium bus lane alternative, we tested configurations with all 6 of the intersection improvements that were also in the managed lane. And ultimately, what we found is that the Greencastle Road and the Beltway improvement were the two that seemed to have the best or the biggest improvement in terms of the cost. The other four had varying degrees of improvement, but the cost started to weigh those out of the median bus lane alternative. So we touched on some of these factors as the discussion was going on, but there are considerations that we can't model or that we can't produce hard quantifiable figures for. And so other considerations under the managed lane scenario is that it would benefit all buses, but to varying degrees, because if we're improving travel time in all the lanes, even the local buses would benefit as well. This does have an increase to traffic along US 29. Our analysis showed that traffic volumes along the corridor would actually increase under the managed lane scenario. It would require enforcement to ensure the optimal operation, and there have been questions about that raised. It would improve operations, but that is reliant on carpooling, and that carpooling may require additional marketing, program support, and other incentives to try and reach that potential.
I think you glanced at this earlier, but can you explain how you estimate how many carpools you're building in your model?
So there are two models. There's the traffic simulation, which were those travel time charts, the bar charts that we showed,
Yeah.
and then there were the chart that showed the mode share actually came out of the traffic forecast. And so the simulation, we estimated an additional 10% of carpools on top of the existing carpooling in the corridor. Under the travel forecast, that is choosing the assignment based on whichever is best for the user. And so what we saw in the traffic forecast is that those assumptions for the split are based on whether carpooling is good for the person making the trip or whether transit's better for the person making the trip.
Okay, that seems kind of, okay. So, and this is HOV3 is the assumption?
2+.
Not, explain what 2+ is, please.
So 2
Plus a
or
driver.
3 or 4, depending on how many people. So we assumed the minimum threshold to be considered a carpool is 2 people.
2 people.
You and a passenger.
2+ just means 2 and a minimum of 2.
Yes.
Okay. Right. So I asked because my understanding of what's happened in, well, Virginia and other states is right there. The number of carpools has been overestimated in places, and the number of carpools have been dropping, right? And so haven't other jurisdictions moved from HOV3 to HOV2 and had a problem? We've had low adoption, right, of our HOV lane just on 270 for years, right? Is that incorrect? Is my memory wrong?
The trends are moving the opposite direction, but a lot of that has to do with switching from HOV exclusive lanes to HOV toll lanes and trying to control the floor on those. And that's something you would see on a corridor like this as well. If we were oversubscribed in that managed lane, we would look to change the policy from 2 to 3, and that would dislocate a lot of carpoolers who would be carpooling under the 2 policy and require them to find another path.
But the number of carpools has been growing in the last few years?
No, I don't think it has. It's clearly over the last 3 years it has declined.
Right.
Declined relatively dramatically. I don't think there was a marked change in carpooling in the few years before that. In fact, there are more carpool facilities, so I don't have the data, but I would suspect that carpooling was steady through that period.
The chairman wants to get in here.
For the record, Jeff Science, Chair of the Planning Board and ex-transportation modeler for a million years ago. And the first thing
What are
I
your
did-
qualifications?
Excuse me?
Sorry, nothing. Go on.
One of the
Ignore
first things I did was model HOVs and car occupancy, and it was a long-term decline in 1975. It has still declined.
Right.
And in the last couple of years, it went from 5%, according to the COGS survey, from 5% to 2%.
Right.
Now, even though you look at time as the determinant of what's beneficial and how many HOVs you might get, it's life circumstances that dictate whether
Yes.
carpooling works, whether you're doing flex time, whether you're doing more commuting from work, from home, or working at home. I'll get it straight. I'm new to the job situation, so it's those things that dictate carpooling. But I'll also admit that all forecasting is a hazardous business.
Yes.
And the further you go out, the more hazardous it is. The higher probability you will be absolutely wrong the further you go out.
Right. I think Eisenhower talked about that, but it is true, right? It would be risky to assume more carpools are going to just magically appear in the future because
It
we
would
set up
be
this
inventive.
incentive. It would be optimistic of us.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Let's go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name's Carl Van Ness. I'm a Gaithersburg resident. On a path where there's no HOV right now, adding HOV will certainly help incentivize people to go on it. So right now there's no benefit. And as a person who commuted routinely to Reston, Virginia, and back, I always looked for an HOV participant so that I could save myself an extra 5 minutes on the roads.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Rohr.
I also want to put this in context. Yes, Commuter Connections at COG reported that between 2019 and early 2022, the percentage of people in the region who carpooled or vanpooled went from 5% to 2%. The same period of time, transit ridership went from 24% to 8%, which is actually a steeper decline. What's happened since then, since early 2022, and I talked with Nick Ramphos, who's head of Commuter Connections, just the other day, he said both of them were ticking up, but there's really no reason to believe that carpooling or vanpooling is going to recover any faster or any slower than transit would.
I'm just going to jump in real quick. Mr. Van Nest, I appreciate your comments and being here. I think we need to figure out, as we're having this conversation, what we're trying to do. Are we creating lanes for buses and for public transportation, or are we creating lanes for buses and people who carpool, which is as little as 2 people? And along this corridor, along the Route 29 corridor, you have the highest percentage of homes with fewest cars. So by the very nature there, you are going to have more people who naturally carpool. When my husband and I when we first moved to the neighborhood that was on that map, we had 1 car, and I know many, many people who have 1 car. And so whenever they're going out, they are typically 2 or 3 people in that car. And when it's on 270, when it's on 495, when it's on any of the other roads, Route 66 in Virginia, as we're building highways, encouraging multiple occupancy ridership is a good thing. And you incentivize that because you can go into a faster lane, you can go into the HOV lane, whatever it might be. But we're not on a highway. And we're on a state road which is heavily trafficked, full of commercial and residential uses. And so I think we just have to keep coming back to the central question of what are we trying to do? Is it a catch-all just to move whomever we want faster, or is it actually going to be for the utility of bus rapid transit? And so I want us to keep focusing on that question as we move forward.
Sure. Next slide.
Glenn, would you like me to summarize the executive's recommendation now, or do you want to?
So similarly, there are other considerations with the median lane configuration. And so this configuration would provide a stronger level of protection from unauthorized use for transit lanes, as well as from the friction between the general purpose lanes and the turning movements. And this was something that Mr. Sartori touched on. This provides a higher level of reliability for the bus service. It's less impacted by congestion, whether that's regularly recurring congestion or that irregular congestion that happens whenever we have incidents along the corridor. The transitways give the bus a more prominent place within the streetscape, if that is the focus of this effort. They are consistent with the master plan, and the way this was modeled, that's not to say that this couldn't be done differently, but the way it was modeled is this would only benefit the Flash and potentially other express services, but there are other considerations that could be made.
In other words, local buses could have access to the medians. There's a way that could be done.
If it made sense and didn't disrupt their ability to serve the local stops on the curb, yes, that could be looked at, but recognizing that we wouldn't be relocating all the local bus stops into the median, that would have to be something that would be heavily weighed.
Thanks.
So this is my last slide, and then I can turn it over to others. So just in summary, up in the north, so if we're looking at kind of Maryland 198 to Tech Road or Musgrove, the proposal would be to harden the shoulder to create a bus and HOV or a bus-only lane. This actually isn't the proposal that's before the T&E committee today. When we looked at this, we found the far northern limits of either a managed lane or a medium bus lane to be not that great, and would be an additional 54 million or 72 million on top of the numbers I quoted earlier. Also, given the fact that planning has a master plan currently underway for the Fairland and Briggs Cheney area, we feel it's prudent to wait and see the outcome of that effort. In the middle, from Tech Road to Sligo Creek Parkway, we'd be hardening the shoulder and repurposing lanes to create either a bus and HOV lane or a bus-only lane. There is the potential to add the station at Franklin Avenue if there's value seen in that, and the cost for those two alternatives, 105 million for the managed lane, 128 million for the median. The southern piece, which we touched on a little bit, from Sligo Creek Parkway to the Transit Center, our Division of Traffic Engineering is working on a study to look at repurposing lanes for bus lanes from in that segment, and we're waiting to see the outcomes of that effort. And that concludes my presentation.
Terrific, thank you.
Yeah, we reviewed the same information with the county executive before bringing it before you. His principal recommendation was that one of the two build alternatives be selected, that they both are an improvement over the existing condition. And as we've already talked about today, that there's significant risk and policy trade-offs between the build alternatives. When it comes down to looking at a build alternative, he recommends the median busway alternative, principally because it provides more protection for the transit operation from either enforcement not working as well as planned, non-recurring events causing traffic to use the lanes, and it's more consistent with our overall climate goals and encouraging transit use over automobile use. And lastly, a main point was that it provides a lot more scope for far greater expansion of transit service in the future than what we've modeled in this study, so that we have a much more robust and resilient corridor for the future. That's being weighed against, of course, the managed lane alternative, which has a greater level of benefits in the short term and less construction-related risk associated with it. But looking at all of those trade-offs, he recommends that you adopt the median bus lane alternative.
Great, thank you. Chris, I'm just curious, what's this status of your latest conversation with our friends in Howard County?
I'll actually let Joanna to speak to that. She's been involved in that on a daily basis.
So we've been actively working with Howard County on the extension of the line. We had put in actually a request for federal funding to purchase vehicles. It was an earmark. We haven't heard back about that. But Howard County is still considering whether whether they can pay for buses even, if we don't get the earmark. Obviously, we prefer to get the federal funding. So they're working on a scope to design 3 stations up in Howard County. We're working on an MOU for how we would actually operate it. The idea is that Howard County will pay for the buses and for the operating cost, but Montgomery County will actually operate the service. It'll be peak only to start. We have agreed that it doesn't make sense for people to actually transfer at Burtonsville, like asking people to get off. So we're looking at ways that we can integrate those buses in with the buses we have now, so you would have a 1-seat ride all the way from Columbia down to Silver Spring.
And the 3 stops are Columbia,
It's
Maple
Columbia, it's the Applied Physics Lab, and what's that other community? Maple Lawn,
Maple
thank
Lawn.
you. Yes.
And not Ellicott City. That was.
It's not going all the way to Ellicott City
Right.
at this point, no.
Yeah,
Yeah, it ends at the Columbia Mall, at their transit center at the Columbia
Yep.
Mall.
Great. That's really encouraging.
Yeah, I mean, they're very, very interested in making this happen. We're hoping within the next, 2 years, we'd be able to do that.
Bruce is still there.
Yep.
All right, good.
Yep.
Nice. Good. This is encouraging.
If I may? Yes.
You may.
Oh, thank you. The planning board got to meet on this a whole long time ago. It was half the duration of my tenure. And on November 10th, we reviewed the study, and we found it really a policy call more than a fact-based call. You were given the mission of the study as being to improve corridor travel time and reliability for all modes. At the planning board, we really think that the council has revised its policy by the adoption of Thrive. And in that plan, it says one of the objectives is to make transit the fastest, most convenient, and most reliable way to travel to centers of economic and social activity. That seems profound to us in the notion of how you look at all these statistics. You've already gone through the reliability and the advantages of having a dedicated median way. And the majority of the council, 3-1, says that the median is the preferred way to go. We did look at...
The commission.
Excuse me?
The commission.
The commission. What is it?
Council.
Oh, council. I forget which seat I'm in.
We're confused enough. I just want.
I'm sorry.
No worries.
All right. The statement in Thrive that is guiding force is it says improve travel times and the travel costs of transit service to achieve greater parity with automotive travel. So that is what you're doing with the medium busway on the managed bus lanes. You're actually improving capacity. You're increasing capacity. And in that regard, we have something else. The staff noted that in increasing capacity, you're increasing the volume of vehicular traffic in front of racial equity areas. We think that travel increases do not benefit those communities by virtue of them adding air pollution, noise, and a split of the community to the other side. So for that reason as well, we would argue for the median lane solution. We did have some other conditions that we placed on that if you want more detail, but that's the major medical. Thank you.
Dr. Ron.
Okay, in terms of my analysis, and we've covered some of this already, but first let me say one thing in preference. I'm a recovering traffic forecaster myself. I spent the first 10 years of my life doing this. And in fact, I was actually chairman of the COGS Traffic Forecasting Subcommittee for a year. So I know where I speak on this. And all forecasts are the basis for decisions on every transportation project, particularly at the federal level. If you're going to apply for federal aid, you're looking out 20 years in the future at least, 20, 25, sometimes 30. So when we go to the next phase, likely what's going to happen is you're going to see 2040 forecasts for everything. In this study we have, if you notice, there were some 2025 forecasts and some that are 2040, but it would be all 2040 in that. And yes, we don't know for sure what's going to happen in 2040. But there's no reason to believe that the numbers in terms of the trends are going to be higher or lower. Just because you don't necessarily believe the numbers you see right here doesn't mean they're not going to necessarily be better for one option or the other. So you basically, it's not so much that you're right or wrong, you try to be consistent. You try to treat each alternative consistently, and that's what was done here. Summarize, again, under all modes, the managed lane does better. It's 5 minutes faster for BRT itself, for the reasons that Corey pointed out, and 6 minutes faster in the evening. Under the carpool and vanpool, one of the reasons why I see a large increase in carpooling and vanpooling is because it's a 57% improvement in terms of travel time for people going the entire corridor from Burtonsville to Silver Spring, with that lane be able to be used by carpools and vanpools, and a 31% faster trip in the morning. And for non-BRT, non-carpool vanpool, which is, yes, single occupant vehicles, but it's also commercial vehicles, and it's also local ride-on, or other buses that would not be using the BRT lane. It's 12 minutes faster in the morning and 7 minutes faster in the evening. The cost, and well, one more thing about the ridership. The equity emphasis areas in this corridor are mostly north of the Beltway. And in that section is where you have the best travel time advantage compared to inside the Beltway, because most of the traffic is going southbound to Silver Spring, or to the Beltway, or going northbound from Silver Spring or the Beltway. You remember from the Thrive discussion that the racial equity consultant said that BIPOC residents, I'm quoting, said the transportation policies were being too focused on transit and not acknowledging the needs of the working class who rely on their vehicles to access jobs and employment. I would point out that, again, many of the people in this corridor only have one car, and they need to be able to go by any way they can go, whether it's by single occupant vehicle or by carpool, vanpool, or by transit. And not everybody is going where the transit is going. There's a lot of trip making being done in patterns which don't fit neatly into even expanded transit access. And so in that respect, I would strongly suggest that the managed lane option really is the best alternative for addressing the historic inequities in East County, because it provides access to everyone living in East County, not just for those who can use BRT. As far as the larger number of vehicles using 29, how many people actually live on 29 north of the Beltway, actually have houses front on it, are impacted by the somewhat larger amount of traffic? The answer is almost none. There are very few houses that front on it. Particularly when you get north of White Oak, none at all. Yet it does serve the residents and businesses in that part of the area by giving them a faster trip. The cost estimate, on top of page 6, you'll see actually one of the forecasts, which is for 2040, looking at the non-auto driver mode share. And that is really, I think, the key metric. It isn't so much how many people are taking transit versus not. It's the number of people who are not driving versus those that are driving. Non-auto driver mode share. And what you find is that the managed lane option has by far the best, wherever you are in the corridor, Paint Branch, Northwest Branch, Four Corners, or Spring Street. One of the critiques of the managed lane option was that ride sharing is much reduced, and we talked about this. Both ride sharing and transit is way down from what it was pre-COVID. Both are ticking back up again, but again, there's no reason to believe that one's not going to come back better than the other. Neighborhood access, we talked about that. There are 10 locations where, under the median lane option, you'd be restricting traffic going into neighborhoods that have to take a turn that they normally wouldn't be taking, and you don't have any of that with the managed lane option. The costs have been characterized as being the difference between $105 million for managed lane, $128 for the median lane. Actually, the difference is greater than that because it's not an apples-to-apples comparison, which is what the committee wanted when it talked about this project back in January of 2021. The managed lane option includes 6 intersection improvements. The median lane option only has 1. Those intersection improvements, while useful to some degree, and we just talked about how some of them are maybe more useful than others, are not particularly important as it comes to what your transit project is. In fact, since this is a transit project, if you wanted to do those intersection improvements, they ought to be done under a different project anyway, just as you separated out the bike and pedestrian improvements. You might remember the original study also looked at bike ped improvements, and you followed that up by immediately establishing the US 29 bike ped PDF, and you've dedicated millions of dollars already to that program. So the difference is really not $23 million between 105 and 128. The difference is the difference between 82.5 and 124.6, or 42.1 million, which is a 34% reduction. Same is true with the right-of-way. The right-of-way is shown as being a little bit more impacted with the managed lane versus the median lane, but that's a function of the intersection improvements. Take those intersection improvements out, and actually the managed lane has slightly less impact on right-of-way than the median lane, although I would say both of them are really quite small. I don't want to overemphasize that point. A couple other advantages of the managed lane is that, first of all, there is construction impacts of creating barriers in the median to separate the buses from the other lanes. That will take a couple of years to do, and will, again, make traffic along 29 very, very, let's leave it at that, very, very difficult over that period. You don't have that with the managed lane option. And secondly, one of the things that wasn't modeled at all is there is the opportunity under the managed lane option to actually run in the off-peak direction. In other words, not just southbound in the morning and northbound in the evening, but also northbound in the morning and southbound in the evening, because you're creating that fourth lane. Or if you choose, you could repurpose that the lane further south when we're talking about repurposing. And you could provide at least a few minutes, not very much, but a few minutes more travel time advantage for people heading northbound in the morning, say to Viva White Oak or to any other destinations for trips, for jobs in that corridor. Now, the advantage of the median lane option, one that's been purported, is that it adheres closer to the master plan. And there are two master plans involved. One is the 2013 BRT corridor plan, which does clearly show that there is the aspiration for a dedicated bus lane. And obviously the median bus lane does that along, not the entire corridor, but part of it. The managed bus lane, managed lane is, you could think of it as being a dedicated right-of-way. It's not just for buses, it's also for carpools, but general use traffic can't use it. But it's clearly not the same as the median lane. However, the same 2013 plan says that although the plan identifies rights-of-way necessary to facilitate the development of a network of dedicated transit lanes, it recognizes, however, that the final decision on treatment in each transit corridor must be made at the time of implementation when a transit service plan is in place. In other words, once you know more about what is actually doable in this corridor, and I would stipulate that you have a lot of that information now. And then the question came up about Thrive. What meets Thrive? I actually printed out the policies in Thrive having to do with transit. I'll just read them very quickly. One says build a network of rail, bus rapid transit, and local bus infrastructure and services, including demand-responsive transit services that make transit the fastest, most convenient, and most reliable way to travel to centers of economic, social, and educational activity and opportunity. Both these options do that. Both of them do that. Second one, convert existing general-purpose traffic lanes to dedicated transit lanes in a manner consistent with other county policies. The median lane does not do that. The managed lane, depending on whether you think of a bus carpool lane being a dedicated lane, does do that. Improve travel times and travel costs of transit services to achieve greater parity with automotive travel. Both of them do that. Both of them create a much greater incentive to take transit, in the case of the managed lane, to carpool than it would be to stay in a single occupant vehicle. That's one of the reasons why and I was surprised by this too, that the HOV percentage is much higher than is what it was. I think Mr. Reamer wrote that up. And it's because of the travel time advantage of 57% in the morning. It makes that huge difference. Connect historically disadvantaged people in parts of the county to jobs, amenities, and services by prioritizing investments in increasing access to frequent and reliable morning to late night transit service. Well, it's true that there is same amount of transit service under both options. As pointed out, the transit service on BRT and on local bus would be marginally better under the managed lane option than under the median lane option. And if you think of this more broadly in terms of not just people taking transit itself, but people not using their cars, you take into account carpools and van pools, the advantage is much, much greater. And the last one, which is appropriate, which has to do with this area, ensure safe and comfortable access to transit stations via walking, rolling, and bicycling. Both of these options have the same ped bike improvements coming to each of these stations. So the one advantage that median lanes definitely have, and we've talked about this already, is that you have a self-enforcing self-enforcing enforcement situation when you have a median lane which has barriers on either side. When you have a lane that's not separated by barriers, there is the propensity for scofflaws. And there's two types of enforcement that you can put into place to try to keep that from happening. One is direct police enforcement, which in this corridor south of White Oak is going to be close to impossible. because there's no place to pull people over. But camera enforcement, which becomes more and more what we're relying upon for this kind of thing, is very doable. And there are other jurisdictions, and point out San Francisco and other places that are looking at or have actually implemented camera enforcement. And if you have camera enforcement with a heavy fine, then that will be self-enforcing to a large degree. Perfect? No. And yes, we would need to go to the General Assembly to get authority to be able to have enforcement, just like we did with speed cameras and red light cameras for this managed lane option. But we're going to need it anyway, because we're going to need it for Beers Mill Road, the BRT, where we have queue jumps, which are just right adjacent to the lanes, and a scofflaw can get in that lane and just jump through the intersection, unless there's something there that would keep people from wanting to do that. And there'll be other situations within the BRT planning. I'm not sure if there's any on 355, but there will be in others where you're going to have this situation. So the bottom line is I am recommending the managed lane option, but a couple of points on this. One is the CIP, you might recall, has $11 million in it for what's programmed. You don't need all $11 million for the managed lane option. All you need is 7.7. So I would program, if you go with the managed lane option, program the $7.7 million, and the other 3.3, did the math right, would be available. This would be impact tax money. Transportation could be used for other transportation projects in FY23 or 24. And then secondly, if you want to go with the median lane option, then I would program the $9.5 million, not the $11 million. That's in the CIP now, because that's the cost of doing preliminary design for that option, and the extra $1.5 million would be could be used for other transportation improvements in the shorter term. I do need to make a real quick reference to the other recommendations, because the planning board had other options which I think we're all agreeing with, but they need to be on the record to talk about. One is to defer decision on improvements, the intersection improvements on Route 29. As pointed out, there is a Fairland, in the upper part of 29, there's a Fairland Briggs Cheney master plan underway, which will come to council late next year, and depending on the results of that, will maybe color the decision as to whether to do all those intersection improvements or some of them or none of them. The ramp from southbound Colesville Road onto westbound Beltway is one that the planning board is sort of mixed on. It says delay implementation of the second ramp. However, if advancing the second ramp is deemed essential to traffic operations, it must be accompanied by improvements that eliminate conflicts between motor vehicles and pedestrians. So pedestrians can cross, if you're going up the west side of 29 and crossing that ramp, that you can make it safe to cross 2 lanes versus 1. I believe that's important to do under either of these two options, because right now, particularly in the morning, you have a lot of traffic which is backing up on 29 up to Blair High School and north, and bollocksing up everybody else is trying to get into Silver Spring. You're going to need that under either option. So I've included that in the cost estimate of both of these options. Defer decision on capacity improvements at the intersection of US 29 Greencastle Road. It's actually sort of repetitive from what I said earlier about the master plan up there. Don't construct a sidewalk on Sligo Creek Parkway at the northeast corner of 29 Sligo Creek Parkway intersection as part of this study, but consider it as part of the US 29 Ped Bike Improvements Program, what I mentioned earlier. The proposed sidewalk relocation at Burnt Mills East Special Park will need to be reviewed in more detail by the park staff. And any proposed work on the parkland will require concept review and park construction permit review and approval. I don't think there's any disagreement about any of those. Oh, and thank you. And I think all parties agree that we should not do the Franklin Avenue stop, whether it's managed lane or a median lane, for the reason that the ridership there is relatively very low, actually, and the travel time advantage for folks using BRT is very minor compared to just a regular ride-on. You're less than a mile away from Silver Spring, and there isn't much travel time to be saved by a bus that doesn't make a stop between there and Fenton Street versus one that maybe makes 1 or 2 other stops along the way. And that's a cost and an impact that we felt like was not needed. So, right, that was long-winded. Any other discussion? Time for a decision.
Or my colleague.
Thank you.
in reverse chronological order, is everybody okay with the planning board recommendations on those other less controversial topics, including Franklin? Okay, great. And then on the $64,000 question of managed versus median, gentlemen?
I'm going to support median. I think, I like the way Chairman Zients described it. It's kind of a more aspirational policy question about what kind of infrastructure we want. And I think that if we were to do the managed lane, we would regret it. I think we'd be back there 20 years later saying, why didn't we do dedicated lanes, exclusive lanes for the transit system? And I think there's so many assumptions here at play. It's just really hard to know what to make of all the various assumptions. But I think if we were to build a dedicated median system, we're going to have a high-quality bus transit system. I think that's knowable. And I think that could have a transformational impact. I would worry that the alternative models might not support land use changes. Like, I think we could build a more urbanized corridor through our future master planning if we had the median system. I think it would just lend itself to that a little bit better. And I just generally, it's hard to know what to make of the various assumptions, but I think that if we build the infrastructure that we think we need, hopefully those things will work themselves around that. So that's why I support that.
Okay, great.
I appreciate
Always welcome.
Councilmember Rimmer's comments and completely agree. And I think the way Chair Zients referenced our new general plan as a basis for the median lane, I think is spot on. And it might very well be, at least for me, the first decision I make based on Thrive 2050. And it's in support of transit. Because we, in this document, in Thrive 2050, I was looking through it as the chair was talking, because he was pulling from it so well that I wanted to see how many other references to transit there were, and there's more than 200, I think, if my Control F function works properly. But one of the metrics that is stated is, success of this is based on non-auto driver mode share. And if that's the vision that we want, and it is certainly the policy that our planet needs, then the median proposal is the best way to get there. And circling back to the conversation at the beginning with the confounding data that we were trying to figure out and reconcile, appreciate the presentation, but recognizing that it is a very limited short-term or short view forecast. I'm looking a little bit further beyond, and I'm looking decades. And I do think that the median option provides the best bet and the best investment for the residents of the county for decades to come. So I'll support that one as well.
Okay. Well, there's a committee majority, but I too, I think it's all been said, but this to me is a significant decision that's a big investment in the future of the county and the region. I really hope Howard buys into this whole thing, and that this is always how the whole network has been envisioned. We're going on 10 years now, and it's really, I think, exciting that we're at this point. And as you said, Chris, the time differences aren't that significant, and we're not that confident in the data that we are sharing today. The greatest spread, I think, was 10 minutes between managed and median for cars, and that's not insignificant. But given the confidence we have, the lack of confidence we have in the data, and the lack of real clarity we have about what the demand will be in the future, I think we the only thing that makes sense is to make the real investment in reliable, durable transit, in the future for all of East County, and it's going to be a great precedent for the rest of the system as well. So I'm very comfortable with that, and I'm glad we're at this point. I'll just add, I think this is my last T&E committee meeting, so I want to tell you what a pleasure it's been working, Jeff and Jason, with you and all your predecessors at the planning department, Chris and Joanna, Corey, everybody on your team at DOT, and especially Dr. Orlin. I can't wait to watch you implement this under your iron-fisted new chair. So, thank you all very much, and we can move, Mr. Chairman, I think to the. Oh yeah.
I just wanted to echo that and thank this committee in particular for always dealing with our issues in a polite, respectful, data-driven way. You've been absolute professionals to work with all along, and look forward to continuing that under future leadership and hopefully a similar dynamic. But thank you so much for the way you've led this committee over the last 4 years.
Thank you. And I assume we're good on the dual exit ramp at 29, correct? Under either scenario, under the median. Yes?
Oh. That's great. What did you recommend? What did the planning board recommend on that?
So we were recommending that we defer a decision on that, but
Yeah.
in particular, if it does go forward, we want to make sure that there are considerations given to the safety for pedestrians and bicyclists, and there were a couple of options and things that should be looked at. We want to make sure that that is actually, because there could be cost implications of that as well, how you provide that safe
It's
access.
just deferring.
That's fine.
The one issue is the cars back up into the intersection at Four Corners, and so that's the issue, not so much how do you get people onto the beltway. It's just you're trying to preserve some integrity for that intersection.
That's right. What it does is it moves the queue, at least as much as possible, onto the ramp and off of 29 itself.
Yeah, I think within the context of the other decisions that we've made, I think, you could envision it working together okay. So.
Yeah, I think you could use
We'd be
some-
happy to update the committee during the design process on that item.
Great. I'd urge you to look at the ramp on the other side of 29 as well for pedestrian safety improvements, because I think both of those are risky places.
And the recommendation includes all of those other conditions that Dr. Owen went through. Thank you.
Okay, you got it. All right, thanks, everybody. I think we can move on to the joint committee. Thank you to my colleagues on the Fed committee.
Okay. Thank you. Now we're going to have a joint T&E Fed committee, but we're going to have to stop and start again. We have a colleague who's joining virtually, so we'll just take a 2-minute break and then we'll reconvene.